Your thoughts will drag you to 1,000 places. Your thoughts, your sensations. You feel an itch here, feel the weight, feel I don't know what, or then a thought appears. At that moment, 1,000 naked women may appear for you to think about. It's a terrible thing, hard to divert your attention from them. But don't fight your thoughts, don't try to eliminate them. Simply place them within the sphere of the sense of permanence. When you think about something at that moment, remember that it's just one of the billions, trillions of things you could think about. The entire world of thoughts and sensations is open to you. It always has been. Why? Because you are something, because you have an identity, because you are a true self. Some proponents of techniques similar to this call the sphere of thoughts and sensations the self. And they say you must free yourself from the self. I say this is a tremendous error because if I have a true identity, it's that which I must call the self and not the sphere of thoughts. So far from eliminating the self, on the contrary, I must establish myself in that self and say, now I am truly me. Now I know what I'm talking about. Do you understand? Now, in the sphere of thoughts and sensations, what exists is merely the narrative self. That is what you know about your own history, what you can recount. There is the social self, which is the part of your history that coincides with what others know about you, or where there can be an interchange between what you know and what others know. But this, evidently, is part of sensations and thoughts. Thus, neither the narrative self nor the social self is the true self. The true self coincides with what I am, ontologically speaking, with what I effectively am, with what I objectively am, not subjectively. And what I am objectively is this continuity in time. After I explain this, it becomes blatantly obvious, doesn't it? So why don't people perceive it? They don't perceive it simply because modern culture has taken elements that came from age-old traditions and turned them into scientific hypotheses to be experimentally tested. Got it? But what happens is the way of testing this has been completely wrong. Why? Pay close attention. When you conduct a scientific test on immortality, on supra-bodily perception, etc., who is conducting the test? Who is the scientist or experimenter conducting the experiment? Who is he? What is his true self? If he is placed merely in the sphere of the narrative self or the social self, then he is just an illusion. Thus, he is not qualified to test the existence of this extra dimension in other people because he does not perceive this extra dimension in himself. It's like a deaf person conducting hearing tests on others or a blind person working as an ophthalmologist. It's exactly that. So, of course, this is a monstrous violation of the scientific method. But it is this violation they call the scientific method. It's a grotesque, puerile methodological error. Well, I can test these things in others as long as I have perceived them in myself, just as I can test someone else's vision if I can see myself. Right? This means that only people who have awakened to this consciousness of the continuity of the self are qualified to conduct any scientific tests in this area. Others are not. Others are like children tampering with machines they don't understand. In principle, I accept the idea that experience is the ultimate test of reality. But for that, we must take experience seriously. That is, taking into account the requirements that the nature of the fact imposes on the scientific observer. Not by taking any method and trying to apply it as if one were attempting to repair, let's say, a watch with a rubber mallet or dental pliers, which is precisely what these fools have done. Fools like John Dewey. I consider John Dewey a true fool without any exaggeration. I am against treating certain philosophers with too much respect, because first of all, one needs to earn respect. If someone speaks arrogantly and disrespectfully about things far above their understanding, respecting them would be to disrespect these superior things. For example, John Dewey says that methods in education are only valid if tested in reality and yield good results. Well, the education proposed by John Dewey and applied in American schools yielded terrible results. Therefore, according to his own theory, everything he did and proposed is already discredited. This is an example of cognitive parallax taken to the extreme. And I think this was entirely predictable, because the method he suggests stems from absurdity. It starts from an impossible proposition. The impossible proposition is this: now that we have the scientific method, everything said before it is invalid unless validated by the scientific method. So we have to validate everything. I say, this is impossible. Not that it shouldn't be done ideally. Of course, everything should be tested. But how could I scientifically validate knowledge that was not expressed in the language of scientific hypotheses? I would first have to make a transposition. For example, I read something in the Bible that says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Very well. Now I want to scientifically test this. The problem is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth is not an expression formulated in the language of scientific hypotheses. It is in another language. So, I have to find the corresponding scientific hypothesis. The problem is, when I unfold this phrase, which is expressed in mythopoetic language, I don't find one scientific hypothesis. I find 20, 30, 40. Among these, some are certainly true and others false because, as Susanne Langer said, the symbol is a matrix of insights. The symbol doesn't come to tell you how things are. It comes to fertilize your intelligence so that you perceive how they are. This means the symbol itself cannot be transposed into scientific language on the same plane it occupies. This involves a very complicated operation, which cannot be performed by the experimental method, but by the method of symbol analysis. And symbol analysis is done through the meditative recapitulation of the meanings it suggests to you. So, we already have a minor problem. The experimental method is excellent, but before it, there has to be something. John Dewey didn't know this. So he applied the scientific method to things that weren't prepared to be scientifically tested, things that required a whole prior philosophical analysis, which he didn't know how to do. So what was he proposing? He proposed leveling education to his own ignorance. That is to say, everything John Dewey wrote about education should be discarded, and by his own criteria, only what works experimentally is valid. Well, in practice, the adoption of John Dewey's methods had disastrous effects on American education. So what use is John Dewey? To be thrown away and forgotten, unless you can use him as an experience. Like someone who falls in love with a dishonest woman, whom everyone knows is untrustworthy, and they warn him saying, "Look, you're getting yourself into trouble." And he insists. What is this good for? It's useful for him to later remember what he shouldn't have done. As my friend Maria says, I'm not useless, at least I serve as a bad example. This means these subjects have been treated in the academic world with quotation marks, grossly and irrationally, totally contradicting their own claims of scientific rationality in an overwhelming way. Even the tests that verify the existence of some extracorporeal or supracorporeal knowledge in near-death states, what are they good for the investigator? That depends on who he is and on the level of supra-bodily knowledge he can consciously attain. Because it's from this that his understanding of the experiment's meaning will depend. But if he doesn't understand the meaning of the experience, he simply verifies atomistically separated facts from which he can draw no conclusions. Then he'll say the experience was inconclusive. But this inconclusiveness doesn't stem from the nature of the facts, but from the ignorance and ineptitude of the experimenter. So, I don't know if this is clear. This experience I'm talking about, of concentrating on the sense of permanent identity, is like a change of level. That is, in the present. Because one thing is the elements that actually compose your structure, and another is your focus of attention. Humans have the capacity to fixate their attention on any detail, no matter how insignificant. When someone has an obsession or extreme addiction, what is it? It's attention obsessively stuck to something which could be perfectly insignificant, like a card game or a fetish. Someone who thinks about underwear 24 hours a day, I've never understood what's so fascinating about that. For me, underwear only serves to be removed, but some people think otherwise. A person addicted to drugs, for example, has fixated on certain bodily and psychic sensations that they want to repeat. This means we can narrow our circle of attention to the point that we acquire the spiritual dimension of an armadillo. Not even a big armadillo, more like a small one, a ball armadillo, the tiny kind. We have this capacity. Now let me ask you something. Do you know the Flint Studio movie where the guy jumps into a cactus and his friends pull out the spines and ask, "Why did you do that?" And he says, "At the time, it seemed like a good idea." So, we can do anything because, at a given moment, it seems like a good idea, but when you look at it, it's sheer stupidity. We can narrow our circle of attention so much that certain points keep returning obsessively, and we can't free ourselves from them. For instance, there are mild forms of madness, such as constantly thinking about problems. Almost everyone I know does nothing but think about problems. They obviously never solve them, because solving problems is usually impossible. Most of the problems we have are resolved through changes in the general framework of our lives, not through something we've thought of. Solving a problem first in thought and then in practice is one of the most challenging things to do. When you manage to do that with a problem, you're a genius. Usually problems are resolved not because we found a theoretical solution, but simply because life's framework changed and the problem disappeared. So, thinking about problems is like making holes in water. But I'd say almost everyone I know thinks about problems 24 hours a day, or thinks about diseases, for example, or parents who are always worrying about the stupid things their children might do the next day. He's going to become a drunk. He'll get into drugs, he'll turn gay, he'll marry a prostitute, he'll rob a bank, and so on. They think of their child as a monster, a ticking time bomb about to explode. I confess cynically, I have no interest in that. If my children do something foolish, they'll do it. I'm not going to prevent it. If they do and ask for help, well, then I'll think about it. And I know that refusing to think about problems has never worsened my situation. But thinking about them does worsen the situation, because if the problems don't get worse, at least you do. So, we have this ability to narrow our circle of attention for entirely irrational, passionate reasons. But the question is, why should we do this? If we have the ability to focus our attention on certain points, we also have the ability to focus it on others. So why not focus on something that can actually yield something? I say that what can yield the most in your life is to concentrate on your sense of permanent identity, because then all your experiences change in scope. The moment you perform this operation, this shift of focus, and begin to experience yourself as a supra-bodily entity, not confined to a body but possessing one, a temporary body that you'll one day shed like a sock, underwear, etc., even panties, then your sense of identity changes. You place yourself on the plane of spiritual immortality. Then, let's say, the realities of the spiritual and divine worlds begin to appear to you. For example, the moment this consciousness, having discovered its immortality, simultaneously discovers that it is only immortal, not eternal, that indeed it has no limit. It is open to all kinds of knowledge and experiences. It can know everything, and in principle even the entirety of its experiences, the sum total of its life, can be glimpsed at a glance, as happens at the time of death, in moments preceding death. That is, the experience many people report having in states of clinical death, seeing their entire life. You can have without being in clinical death at all. You will never be able to express or recount this. You can't. It transcended your verbal capacity. And at that moment, you've already gained something. You've genuinely gained an interiority. An interiority that isn't communicable. It's exclusively yours. A world of your own. And it's a complete world that encompasses all your experiences, all the human beings you've met, all the episodes of your life, and even imagined episodes you've lived. All of this is now you. It's impossible not to be amazed by this. It's impossible not to feel a sense of jubilation. And at the same time, it's impossible not to perceive, strangely enough, the internal lack of foundation for all of this. As St. Augustine said, "I know that I am, but I don't know why I am." You clearly perceive that you are not your own cause. You realize that your existence is a miracle, and it's impossible not to feel a sense of jubilation, gratitude, and love for the source from which you emerged. The source you do not know, that you cannot see, but you know is there. Just as in the state of impermanence, of dispersion in which we live our bodily and mental life, the permanent self is always there, even if you don't think about it. When you move to the sphere of the permanent self, its foundation, its cause, is also not visible, but it is always there. And it's then possible to begin, as Plato said, a second navigation. But this is something the self-aware immortal soul will do. So to say that the terrestrial soul is seeking God, everyone is seeking God. Someone joins the Democratic Party, they are seeking God. They go to a brothel, they are seeking God. But in truth, only the immortal soul seeks God. The mortal soul seeks what? The immortal soul. So, without this, saying you are seeking God is highly presumptuous. You are not seeking God yet. First, you need to seek yourself. That's why the famous rule exists. Know thyself, and you shall know God. But you will know God afterward. That's why I think most of the religious discussions circulating out there are futile. Because only the immortal soul understands this. The mortal soul doesn't know what it's talking about. Through experience, you understand that this present bodily life is merely a tiny fraction of our reality, and therefore, the knowledge we acquire within the confines of our bodily existence is an appearance within an appearance. But there is something that does not end. It's what is real, what has an ontological foundation, and that stands above the sensations of pain and pleasure we experience in life. Because all these sensations are encompassed within it, as its possibilities. Do you understand? Moreover, bodily sensations, earthly experiences, etc., from the moment you move to this other plane of attention, they are displaced. Instead of disappearing, they are tremendously elevated. Because then, whatever you experience on the earthly plane echoes something in eternity. Thus, let's say, experiences begin to hold a different value. Of course, this awareness of the permanent self, in turn, is impermanent, because from the moment you perceive it, well, the mind and body continue to function. They continue giving you fleeting impressions that don't stop. Still, in the initial stage, this mental and sensory activity may even increase. That's what is called panic terror. Panic terror is the fear that invades. Pan is the king of the elementals, the beings of nature, the subtle beings of nature. In Greek mythology, panic terror was what happened among these beings, for instance, when facing lightning. Lightning symbolizes then the entry of spirit. The spirit terrifies nature, which begins to stir. This same thing happens within you. When this stirring occurs, you tell yourself, "Calm down, my dear. Nothing is happening." You cannot fight against your bodily perceptions or your mental movement. You must encompass and calm them, always remembering that everything you're thinking is within the sphere of your permanent self, not outside it. So it's not about detaching from the body and mind. It's not about eliminating the self. On the contrary, it's about acknowledging things as they are. It's about consciously settling into what you already know is the permanent foundation of your existence, your sense of permanence over time. Do you understand? So, to achieve this, the first thing you need to do is free yourself from this imaginary framework present in our culture, which conceives of immortality as something that happens after death. That is, you transition from mortality to immortality. This is absurd, entirely absurd. Whether you believe in immortality or not, that's generally the concept people have of it. And this concept is self-contradictory. So, searching for something in reality that is self-contradictory is like looking. It's easier to find a horn on a horse's head than this. A horn on a horse's head isn't impossible. It's just a biological impossibility that nature might occasionally violate. But searching for signs of immortality, as if it were another state you enter after dying, and looking for that while alive, oh my dear, it's not going to happen. That's like Jorge Luis Borges's metaphysics. A blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that isn't there. Got it? You're doing exactly that. Either you seek signs of immortality in what manifests it here and now, or you will never find it. Got it?